Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. GEENIE recently launched to reinvent e-commerce to create change by building a curated beauty marketplace and community, connecting independently owned brands with values-based consumers rooted in the intersectionality across BIPOC, LGBTQ, over 55 plus sustainability, and even more with value-seeking consumers. Joining me to discuss is Chana Ewing, founder of GEENIE. Chana, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you so much for having me, Jill.
Tell us more about GEENIE and what it was like launching during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. So a little bit of what it was like launching during the COVID pandemic is what you're hearing right now, just like always, hearing a bit of sirens outside of my window. I live in downtown Brooklyn. So unfortunately, just like hearing sirens of people like going to the hospital. And so like thinking about working from home and what that was like for most of us who stayed in New York and having to contend with what was happening around us, right? So that part of it, just like the psychological piece of like, hey, we're in a pandemic and I'm launching a business. So I want to like put that first and foremost in terms of like thinking about how to manage one's own stress and thoughtfulness around your peers and your coworkers, all the other good stuff. So as you mentioned, GEENIE launched just this past July, so we're a little bit over a month old. It is a curated beauty marketplace and community, and it's all about shopping your values. We want to make it easier for folks to come together in one space and find the indie brands that really match who they are and the impact that they want to have in the world. So that includes like heritage brands, so Black owned or Latinx owned brands, that forward that as like the center of their story, but also brands that do stuff like toxic free products or inclusive products or sustainability. So really we're just trying to bring values together underneath one roof and one space for folks to connect, discover, shop, and share these indie brands that meet their values.
You approach curating the content in the product? Is there certain criteria that you look for before bringing a designer on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is that we're looking for brands that are indie. So that's like first and foremost. So meaning that they're not already in a major retailer like a Walmart or a Target or a Sephora, right? So we're looking for a brand which, our distribution platform could really help them reach the consumers, right? Become like a really just a great discovery partner for them. And really the thought process behind that is that, these smaller brands have a smaller marketing budget, right? So how can we be a marketing partner for them to be able to meet consumers who really would be attracted to their value propositions? So beyond the indie component, we're also looking at, what's in your product. So how you're making your product, who you're designing it for. And then the last line of criteria is like, what's the cultural impact? What's the cultural lens that you're looking at? So for some folks, it's like, there's an idea that they are trying to target. Like one of our brands is called Beauty Brownie, and they're really all about colorism and really taking down this idea of, lighter skin versus darker skin and all that stuff that happens within the beauty spectrum. So that's one lens. Another one could just be a simple give back, right? So another brand in our on our platform, Fempower Beauty, they have a buy one give one free. So you buy one product, one lipstick from them, and they give away a lipstick to a femme in need. So we're just looking at like all the kind of layers around how that brand is thinking about how they are impacting culture in some meaningful way.
Yeah, let's talk more about impact. Do you think consumer-driven purchasing will make an impact and drive fundamental structural change with how companies approach the marketplace?
Absolutely. I think that what we're seeing now really is just like consumer activism at its peak. But this consumer activism has been around for as long as, I don't know, probably well into the last century, right? So like, we saw that with the boycotts during the civil rights movement. The people have been organizing around pressuring companies and industries for a long time. I think what you're seeing in this moment is now that it's actually your everyday person who's become a consumer activist. So not that you're like going outside and maybe participating in some sort of, structured protest, but if you're searching the internet looking for Black-owned brands or BIPOC brands or, queer brands, like if you're doing that sort of thing and you're like, hey, I want to make a decision around who I'm shopping for, that's a level of just casual consumer activism that is becoming more popular as we see in this time period.
Let's discuss Black entrepreneurship and management. What are some of the challenges the Black community faces bringing businesses online?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest challenge is obviously funding. So, there's that statement that is like an oft repeated statement around how women have only received about, I think, 0.2% or it might be up to 0.3% of VC funding in the last few years. Well, that number is much lower for Black women founders, for instance. So I think it's like 0.005%. Less than 60 Black women have received over $1 million in funding. And that's, a real big challenge. And that hasn't necessarily changed in this moment when you're seeing a lot of folks talk about, the necessity of thinking about their portfolios in a different way and the necessity of supporting and investing in Black, Indigenous, and POC talent. I'm reminded of a newsletter I read recently by Lolita Taub, who is an angel investor that I follow on Twitter. She also has a newsletter that she releases on Sundays. And one stat that she shared in about mid-July, she said that she was curious whether or not the all of the messaging that VCs had been on Twitter saying, oh, right from COVID on, like, oh, we want to support underrepresented founders and all this other good stuff. She wanted to see if people were really putting their money where their mouth is. And it turns out she went on Crunchbase and she looked up and she found that only 43 investments had been made to BIPOC founders between the middle of May and the middle of July. During that same period of time, 3,100 investments were made. So 3,100 investments were made, 43 for all, that's not just Black folks, that's all Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that's just a really small number given the overall capital deployed. So I would say that that is the number one challenge for Black founders, for POC founders, is really about figuring out this capital situation.
Chen, I want to shift gears a bit as we wrap up here and talk about diversity and inclusion a bit, which is a priority for us at Nasdaq. I lead our veterans group. We team up a lot with our Black and Hispanic networks to promote financial literacy, to help level that playing field, to ultimately build more diverse and inclusive workforces. And I want to bring that book back to a book that you authored, An ABC of Equality, which introduces complex concepts around social injustice to young children. Why does this need to be introduced early? And how do you approach that kind of topic? And do you think early introduction will naturally lead to more diverse and inclusive communities?
Absolutely. I love that you start off by saying that, you all connect with internally. So, you lead the veterans group, but you're also working with the Black and Latinx groups, and you all are figuring out ways to talk to each other. That's really what intersectionality is about, right? It's thinking about what are the multiple layers of identity. So there are Black veterans, there are Latinx Black veterans, there are women Black veterans, so it's unique stories. And sometimes in what you see in corporations or even out in the world is that we all get siloed underneath one storyline, and so it could be hard to see the many layers in which our identities are operating in society, right? So the point of an ABC of equality is to present identities specifically, but then in each word that we're using, we're kind of layering on a new story around who you see. So in the actual book, you'll see a brown skinned Muslim girl, wearing a head wrap. You'll see a Black person, a Black child in a wheelchair. So you start to kind of showcase to children early the diversity of experiences. And also, because it's adults likely teaching these concepts to children, it's a really nice refresher. So I like to say that it's actually a simple tool for all ages to get back to the basics, to the foundations around who we are and how we can connect with each other.
All right, Chana, appreciate the insight. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You got it. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.